must say my high school days I really wasn't referred to as the cool kid, maybe even summed up as awkward, but really as an adult here, my high things have changed. Hey, and welcome to this edition of Road Warrior. I'm your host, Grant Roberson. Now this week, the great equalizer has arrived, making this awkward person a little bit cooler, at least for a week. Now behind me is the 2014 Dodge Challenger SRT8, and what it does is really level the playing field for anyone that went through those awkward years and never really labeled as cool. Get behind the wheel of this bad boy, and everyone's going to take notice. Now the first thing you're going to think of when you see the exterior of the Dodge Challenger is really the good old days of this big muscle car era. Now I flash back to my high school days, of course, and the fact this is a two-door coupe really reminds me of my Pontiac Grand Am and the Buick Regal. Now there is no comparison, of course, and a vehicle like this in the high school days really would have made the life just a hair easier for this somewhat geekish kid. Now what the Dodge Challenger brings to the forefront, of course, is that horsepower under the hood and this throwback Thursday kind of exterior. Now the best thing I love is it really draws on the past. Huge front hood, huge rear end, and that spoiler to boot. Of course, you can't go wrong that it delivers that horsepower we all expect. Now when you look at the exterior stylings of the Challenger, you do have a little bit of nostalgic past with a hint of the future, and even to note we do actually have sheet metal with just a hint of plastic and rubber here and there. Now one nice little note, there is a 392 badging on this vehicle, paying homage of course to one of the original engines. Of course the 392 replaced the 354 back in the 1950s. Now it's had a resurgence here on the SRT8 and really delivers that horsepower, which we'll get into in a minute. Now by the numbers, of course, this vehicle measures in quite lengthy at about 197 inches with a stretch 116-inch wheelbase. Now those numbers compare to even a mid-size to full-size SUV, so it's obviously going to hold its own on the road. Now looking at tires, we're riding on 20-inch wheels with Performance 245s in the front and Performance 255s in the rear. Now one last thing to think about, of course, is ground clearance, keeping this vehicle nice and snug to the road, and they do that here with about 4.8 inches of clearance. Now I'm no true gearhead, but I know where the engine is. It's somewhere right here, and I do know how to drive it because there's like a pedal or something you press, but either way you stomp the gas. It's not rocket science. Now one thing I love, of course, is the fact that they do have smart key systems and the ability to pop the rear trunk. Now that's important in some cases, but not here on this muscle car, because really what do people want to look under? And it's right here under the hood, so why not put a hood release right here on the key fob? Now as we swing around, of course, this is going to come with the 6.4 liter Hemi V8 engine. Now what that means is it's going to deliver tons of horsepower on this SRT8, around about 470 with 470 foot-pounds of torque. Now this is not the Hellcat edition, which comes with a 6.2 liter for 2015 with a supercharger attached. Now it's going to deliver 600 plus horses and really rival the latest of the muscle cars out on the road. Now what you're going to find under the hood when you pop it, of course, is these 392 coverings on the engine. Again, the kind of paying homage to the good old days, and the fact that you can really work on this engine if you want to, not like the ones now that have very little hood. Everything's tucked back. This one's right where you want it, right where you can get to it. Now when you swing around to the front end, you're going to notice this menacing offering that they have, and really the first thing anyone is going to notice as you muscle down the road. Now the comparison to the good old days is the metal is gone and replaced with kind of a plastic-like feel. Now this black insert really contrasts the purple even down low here with this fascia, again directing airflow, but really kind of giving that low stance. Now the headlights are old school with the standard circular-like design, and maybe the one drawback at night when you're going down the road, because it just didn't seem to illuminate even with the brightness on. Other than that, of course, you have great airflow, great dynamics, and of course here on the hood you have more airflow, keeping that engine cool as it goes in these little ports and tucks inside, really allowing that engine to breathe. Now as you swing around to the rear end of the Challenger, maybe not the most important area, because of course the front end is going to really get the most notice, but we talked about just a second ago that the key fob really needs to have a hood release on the front, just as important as the rear end. Now as you swing around here, you're going to notice, of course, this black stylized rear spoiler, giving you just a little bit more aerodynamic flow and the coolness factor. Now one thing you're going to notice when you go to these big nostalgic like designs is, of course, the rear end is just as big, and that huge rear trunk like the good old days. Now this does have a huge rear deck, and it's going to translate into the cargo area. As this hood rises, you're just going to notice that instead of a cavern, you have a huge opening. Remember the good old days, like sneaking in the drive-in and people sneaking into the trunk. Well, that almost is the case here. But once you notice this, there's a huge opening. Lots of items can come in here. Now that really came into play during our trip to Uconnect, where we had a 2 or 3 night stay, allowing us to take all the beach stuff, all the luggage, throw it inside in a coupe that really shouldn't have much offering back here. Now by the numbers, you're looking at about 16 cubic feet, really compared to a full-size sedan. So this coupe really can translate on the weekends and the excursions. Now one thing we did do back here is we added a bike rack tied in, allowing us to put 2 bikes in the back. Now did that add kind of a new spoiler look? Maybe it did, and it maybe took the muscle car out of it and made it more of a weekend hauler. But once you take the bikes out, it goes back to its muscle car like prestige. Now the SRT8 engine comes coupled with either a 6-speed manual transmission or the as-tested 5-speed automatic, which came a little bit as a shock because I assumed the horsepower in the hood meant you had to do the clutch dance, but thankfully that wasn't the case. Now on the steering wheel, they do of course have the paddle shifters, so you can kind of get the best of both worlds. Now one thing you're going to notice is the performance numbers, with 0 to 60 coming in just 4 seconds and the quarter mile coming around about 12 seconds, just the same. Now 0 to 100 is going to be around about 15 seconds with a top end speed of 182 miles an hour. Now the performance numbers are great, but better yet is the fuel saver technology on this engine, pretty much meaning when you don't need the horsepower, it's going to go to 4-cylinder like option. That's going to give you better fuel economy. This vehicle averaging somewhere around about 13 to 14 miles per gallon to 23 on the high end. Now that high end came of course when we were on the trip to Uconnect, getting better numbers because we didn't need all that horsepower. But when we did on that 2-lane stretch needing to pass people, we just stomped the gas and you didn't even notice a switch to V8. Now let's talk about the interior comfort. First thing you'll notice is really these sculpted kind of racing seats, again to be expected on the SRT. Now SRT is badged on the seats just in case you forgot, and on the interior dash. More badging on the interior than you're going to find on the exterior. Now otherwise, legroom in the front of course is plentiful up front, more than 42 inches of legroom, going to handle anyone just fine, and you can stretch back and forth. Now in the back seat, this is kind of a, looks like a 2+2 design, even though there actually is room for 3, and you're going to find it actually surprisingly comfortable. Now by the numbers, about 32 inches back there. Now I had 3 of the 4 kids back there and actually found legroom to be just fine. My oldest daughter is fairly tall and she still found just enough room. Now granted, if you slide the front seats forward just a hair, comfort's going to dramatically increase versus at the furthest back position, but you actually can seat 5 people in here if you want. Now you probably don't think about it, but you can actually haul quite a bit of cargo in this vehicle if you transform it, so taking this Speed Demon into a cargo hauler is fairly easy. Now this back seat's kind of a 70-30, 80-20 split. You've actually got a real easy handle back here. You just pull it and it's going to tumble forward. Now what that's going to allow you to do is have of course access to that trunk and allow longer items to filter into the cabin. Now this is ideal maybe for those ski trips on the water or even in the snow, allowing really those long items to come in here and you still have room for rear passengers. Now with the plum crazy purple on the outside, it screams racing. When you get on the inside here, other than the seats, it's pretty straightforward black everywhere else with just a little bit of chrome accents. Now behind the steering wheel is the old quad port throwback Thursday gauges with a huge speedometer and huge tachometer. Now a hint for 2015, that's all been replaced with more of an LCD screen digital display like we've seen on the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Now on the steering wheel, this is race inspired, nice grip points here, cut off bottom steering wheel so you can really kind of muscle it through. Now I must admit I did a lot of 0 to 45 showboating at the stoplights, not a huge fan of speeding, but really inside wise this is still race inspired. Now when you swing over to the center cluster here, the LCD screen, most notable the Uconnect system we're familiar with, this is the antiquated version for 2014. Now we've seen these other models like the Grand Caravan, and this is just the old school functionality. The new one for 2015, they've redone it to the current version like we had again on the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Much better interface, much better connectability. Now this says it has a phone connection, Bluetooth like technology. Couldn't get it to work. Couldn't even figure out really even how to get it to work. Now we could do the streaming music, but we had to use this thing right here. I think it's called a cord, plugged it into the phono jack, had to go through a few functions and use the phone. A little too old school for me. So for 2015, thank goodness they fixed all of that. Now on this particular model below it, you've got the standard old climate controls, 3 knobs, the temperature controls, no dual climate on this, but who cares, because we're going to spend more time racing than really feeling comfort. On other vehicles, of course, you got this little niches in the doors for extra bottles and storage and all that. Not going to find it here. You pretty much are built to the haunches, right to the edges. There's just no niches you can find, except there is a couple here in the door, really just I found for those gum wrappers where I just tuck them in there, so kind of like a trash can. Now between the front seats, you really got a nice little console. It's going to hold coins, but again, no connectability in here. There's really a power outlet, but no USB like you're going to find on other vehicles. Again, maybe we're just going with the muscle car, and that's about it on this vehicle. And that does it for this edition of Road Warrior and our test drive behind the equalizer known as the 2014 Dodge Challenger SRT8. Now, equalizer meaning that it takes an awkward individual like myself, throws some muscle under the hood, and tries to make me appear just a little bit more cool. Now, one thing we like, of course, is that purple exterior that drew people in, and then that power under the hood and that rumble that really took notice. Now, again, I'd like to thank you for watching this edition of Road Warrior, and as always, keep both hands on the wheel and eyes straight ahead.